Hello, welcome to Art Show. I'm Craig Stover, and today I have with me Graham Preston. Hey, Graham, how are you today?
I'm good. It's a big day, Craig. Big day. I got my shirt that my mother-in-law gave me for my early Christmas present. Hi,
Very
Leslie.
nice.
You know,
Totally correct.
yeah, I'm prepped.
So I want to start out by sharing some images of yours with the people who are watching. So I went on your site and I selected a few of the pieces that I found interesting. And
Mhm,
so these are in no particular order.
mhm.
But I want to ask you. So this is actually the first one that I saw. I can imagine it's a very popular image. Can you tell me a little bit about this one?
Yeah, this comes from a recent passion project of mine that's taken the last 4.5, almost 5 years, and it's basically I got moved over to Barcelona to Spain 5 years ago and started this project where I was writing and writing and writing and realizing that I was writing this novel that I wanted to write for ages, and started illustrating each chapter using like a very painterly vocabulary. And so this is one of the many paintings from this project that has taken so many years. And this particular image, I mean, I guess from an illustrative standpoint, it doesn't need much explanation. You kind of see what's going on there, but I just love how it kind of feels almost like Romanesque, and the way like a Romanesque period illumination or something. And so I wanted to kind of blend this kind of contemporary painting vocabulary and this kind of coming of age story with this moment.
What's the
Yeah, so
size of this?
this is about like 3 feet by 2 feet.
Okay,
Mhm.
all right. So it's not huge.
Actually 3.5 feet by 2 feet. Yeah.
Okay, all right. It's
Hmm.
a wonderful piece. It's really sort of almost iconic. And then there's more and more that you get into it as you continue to look. Um, there's another one.
Yeah.
Oop, let me go back. Sorry.
Yeah. That's okay.
So this piece, I do have a passion for artwork that I find sort of whimsical and interesting, things that sort of suck me in and have more than just the first glance. What's the story behind this?
Well, again, this is another piece from the book, and every one of these pieces are titled. It's kind of a play on the painting versus illustration um, little combat that goes on, and that discussion. And each piece is called illustration of, and following the title. And this one's called illustration of a glorious attempt. And this is actually about a little boy going with his grandfather fishing, and he's jumping to catch. They're making their own fishing poles, and that's part of the story. He's the little boy is jumping to catch the boughs of a tree to kind of snap it off and make these fishing poles, and the grandfather's just kind of reflecting on how this sort of activity would break his body, and he was just watching kind of the little boy jump and how the and jump and miss the boughs of the tree, the branches of the tree, and just watching how the light was hitting him and that sort of thing. And I'm just really,
Fascinating.
yeah, I'm just really fascinated with narrative and kind of
Yeah.
uh, how this kind of layering of information creates meaning. And for me anyway, the more information behind a piece, the more kind of like personal symbology or layering of data kind of creates meaning in the world. Like it's this compiling of you can self-reference. You can dig deeper and deeper and deeper, and so that's why I'm so interested in narrative.
Well, I could tell that it was related to the other one because it's the same sun, and the bird makes another appearance in this, but it was different enough that I didn't want to automatically link them together. Um, I'm a little bit curious about these have a very sort of surrealist bent to them. A surreal reality, not a Dolly liquid watch kind of a thing, but more of a surrealism in terms of the way that there's so many different ideas, as you had mentioned, overlapping one another. Does any of this ever come out of sort of like a dream of yours, or is this more of a subconscious kind of a thing? Like, are you just layering your materials to find out what happens, or are you consciously aware of this was what you wanted?
I think it comes from the writing, and then it's not so linear as to be like this scene isn't described, right? But this is the feeling of the narrative and the motion. And I also I like the fact that in still images you can collapse time and layer things in a way to describe the passing of time within a still image, and how you can also separate landscape and time of day. And I like to do that with light. A lot of times I'll play with dark and light as references to different times to suggest that repetition of figures to describe motion. So they come across as surreal, but they're not surreal in the aspect of, as you were saying, Dali talks about.
Yeah, no, it's not like that. Yeah.
How these things don't mean anything. You know, all of the imagery that I tend to make has a really deep and personal meaning. I have to feel absolutely compelled and connected to an image to make it. And so through the writing, I kind of get these ideas, or sometimes actually the whole entire book came first in these kind of flashes of imagery. But like I said, it's all very personally symbolic to me.
So this is clearly a different bag of worms, right?
Yeah.
This, I assume, this does not come from writing. This is something else. What is this? What am I looking at?
Yeah, basically, this was our apartment in Barcelona. I live in the Canary Islands now, but this was a few years ago. And my wife was, she was away for the weekend traveling. And we had this like really beautiful sunlit apartment. And so this was more of my idea of capturing the feeling of her moving around in that space, and kind of watching her water flowers in the morning, and just like kind of float around the room. And instead of actually trying to paint the apartment, I was painting the idea of the apartment. You know, I really love, I mean, you know, I enjoy mimetic representation, looking at something and painting it. I find it to be very meditative. But I think that there's really something special that happens between when you disconnect from that and try and use memory to recreate a thing. It's like the distortion and imperfection of the human lens creates something just wonderful. And this is one of those paintings. It's a small little painting, but it just really, I feel, describes the sentiment and feeling of how I feel about her. And I think it's hard to make a painting like this successfully. And as an homage to that thought, you know, I have the Chagall painting, The Birthday, in the background.
Yeah, I was gonna. That's actually why I chose this picture. I mean, I like the Chagall reference, and the reference that there's, you know, the two people. I think that's called The Kiss.
The Kiss or The Birthday. I think it might have two.
Right. But then it was, so that was what led me into it. But then it was the incorrect perspectives that makes it dreamlike. And then the glow of the figure really is, it works as, you know, as a device to usher in memory. That glow says it all, especially around the feet. So it
thank you. Yeah, just a little lift of the shadow. I mean, it's really cool. I love flattening space in that way and elongating it for the same picture.
I've always felt that by taking perspective and messing with it, you're actually able to insert an additional storyline within it. You can sneak one in there. So you did that quite successfully. But now this is completely different.
Yeah, totally different.
So is this an older work?
No, you know, a lot of these things go on. I kind of shift back and forth. I think a lot of times, for me, just breaking things back down into like my painterly vocabulary and kind of discovering that like historical lineage and tapping into different aspects of describing a landscape or a feeling through paint and color and texture and composition. You know, it's just such an important underlying aspect of the vocabulary and language of painting. I think of painting as a language. You know, it's the same thing to me as writing, and they're kind of interchangeable. And so sometimes to describe a feeling, I just think it's more important to let loose and just kind of use your hand and the devices of that you have, you know, in your toolbox to describe these things without form necessarily, or known form.
I was just talking to another painter friend of mine. We were talking about how there's what I'm attracted to are certain artists who are able to develop their own language over time, a language of mark making, of a palette language, and then use that very specific language to tell their own stories, to tell a very specific story. And I see that in your works. And I like the fact that you can incorporate both pure abstract form but then reference, you know, the reference to the landscape or reference to the figure. I just like that. So that's it. It's working for me in your works.
Oh, thank you. You know, I noticed in your work you do a very similar thing. I think we have a lot in common as far as that's concerned. Like I was going over your work and the trajectory of it over time and how it's changed, and yeah, you have a very similar mode of work.
There's a lot of core elements that I think a lot of painters, I want to say painters, but artists can work from. I see a sort of, there's like a kernel and then there's offshoots of all these artists anymore. I don't think you know, isms, the timeline of art history, I think the timeline of isms is over, and I think now it's more of like, it's like a spray. So,
huge explosion, yeah, just molten lava landing
right, everywhere. So
yeah.
this is a public piece, correct? This is
a public piece, yeah.
Large,
yeah.
very large.
12.
So I love that it's, you know, going back to what we were talking about, it still has those elements of the figure and the landscape, but then it's got this veneer of abstraction, abstract thought over top of it. And I still see that's surrealism bent that's in there. You know, I know I'm not using that word in a way that you're familiar with it, but that's, you know, it's not a realism. It's something else, especially with that line of birds that almost act like a cloud whip. So tell me about this. Is there a story behind this?
Yeah, basically I was hired to do this years before I completed it. And I kept on going through different ideas, and commissions are so difficult, right? Because you're trying to connect to the imagery and the demands of someone else. And so I was going through that wrestling match for years. And then during that time period, my father passed away. And so, you know, I was thinking a lot about home and change and gentrification of my town and just time and the different generations of people who have come and gone over the years. You know, so all of these at this heightened state of emotionality, basically all of these things, these symbols develop to have deep meaning with me, right? Like whether or not that's important to who looks at it or whatever, that doesn't matter. It's just the way it was made. And I started thinking about these different modes of flatness and roundness and painterliness and kind of continuation within the composition, how you lead the eye, of all different symbols of maybe collapsing time in a way, time and maybe even different dimensions and colliding them upon one space. And I was thinking about the history of my town. This is Lambertville. The bottom row there is the actual bridge street of Lambertville, which heads over the bridge to New Hope on the right in the distance. And I just thought about all of these generations living together in the same space and time, you know, or in the same space at different times. But when you erase time, it's all collapsed. And there was just tons of personal symbology.
Yeah,
there.
I can see that. You know, it works for me. I think an easy thing for audiences to see is, you know, even just the way that you represent the trees. So there's two trees and they're so very different, but it's the combination of those together that makes that new energy. Yeah, happy to see it. So lastly, this is the last piece I want to show before we get to questions. And I just thought this piece was also very whimsical to me, and again, we were talking about, there's the trees that are, borderline realism, and that against that flat wave-like form in the background. It just, it's great. It's really wonderful.
Oh, thank you. This was a project that I did with my best friend, my lifelong best friend, who's a singer-songwriter. His name's John Beecher. He's an incredible undiscovered talent. And basically, we were living in this this mansion, essentially, that we were given to live on for a year and a half. This is after I moved out of New York City and was just retreating back into kind of like small town living and trying to find where am I in the art world, And so we wrote this song together, and these paintings, I started painting these paintings, and I had this poem that I had written, and then we wrote this song. And so it's one of 18 poems about this, it's called The Devil's Plea, and it's about this great unrequited love between Satan and Eve. And so it kind of rewrites history in this way. And this was the first painting of that series, and all of the paintings slowly shift from this kind of Romanesque iconography or illumination, kind of illuminated manuscript type things, and they slowly slip into complete abstraction at the very end. And it was just letting go and letting, how can I picture this form? No models, using the things I know about the real world and mimetic painting, and creating this totally abstract and flat space to get at what I wanted to say emotionally,
Yeah, the picture works. So it was great to see it, and glad we could share it. So I want to start well, not start the interview, but continue the interview going backwards. So I want to know about your start in the arts. Did you always know that you were going to be an artist, or did it slowly evolve? How did that work for you?
Well, I had this amazing character of a grandfather he was the 6'2" Englishman who lived in New Hope, Pennsylvania, and he was the head sculptor from Lenox, China. And he had this beautiful accent. And by the time I knew him, he was already retired, but he had made that beautiful swan that you see of the Lenox China pieces,
Nice.
All of these elegant, Baroque and Rococo-esque curves and beautiful. He was also aware of modernism. He was just an epic sculptor, craftsman, cabinet maker, you name it. And he was actually a doctor in England, but came over after the war and during a work relocation program, and raised his whole family being an artist, being a sculptor. And he would draw us kids as little, and I remember sitting there and drawing and watching him draw me, and it was the most incredible thing. And because of him, art was, and his demeanor, and art was just somehow elevated to this thing of value. It was the one thing in the world that I knew had a quintessential human value as a child. I was always talented drawing or whatever, but years went by, and I put that energy into making surfboards, and he died, and then one day I got injured or developed an injury and was no longer able to walk without a cane, didn't know what was going on with my body, and could no longer surf or do the things I love. And I had to make a life change. And so basically one day I decided I was going to move up north and help my dad with his work. And before that time, I couldn't do anything physically anymore. So I went out I was like, I think I can paint. And I went out to the art store and I bought these 2 giant canvases, the biggest ones they had, It was going out of business. This was in Florida. And I stacked them one on top of the other. And for 3 months, I stood in front of a mirror and I painted a self-portrait. And
you still have it?
Well, I sent you a picture of it. No, it's it's gone. It's gone. Long story.
Well, technically, you still have it if you still have a photo of it. But
I have a photo of it, and it may be one of the best paintings I ever I've ever made. because it
There's
was
something
just
to beginner's luck. I get it. So
the intensity of that, of just like not having any context of or information of art history and outside voices, and just
yeah.
standing there and painting what I felt and how. And I never do self portraits, but
Mm.
that is the most honest self portrait for the time that I've ever made. And
Mm.
yeah, I
So
really wish.
you, we've talked a little bit about sort of what springboards a lot of your art. So you had mentioned that you were writing a book, so there was already sort of source material there for something, or you wrote a song or whatnot. So I'm curious, like when you go to make a new work, do you always have inspiration behind you as you're working in the studio, or can you just work in the studio and generate ideas as you're working?
It's both. It's certainly both. I think, a lot of times you're painting a painting and you're aware of the things where it's successful, and but you're more aware of the many failures and shortcomings. And I think a lot of times I hop from one painting into another to address those failures, and then maybe I rectify them in some way, and then just discover more failures.
Uh-huh, yeah. Well, I get it. I mean, there's different kinds of artists, and there's different working methods. Long ago I realized I'm the kind of artist I need to make 50 failures before I make one good one. So
What happened?
that's just part of my process. I'm curious though, with your process, do you keep a sketchbook? Sketch
Yes,
out stuff?
I keep many sketchbooks, and I
Do you?
always go in with the intent of every page I'm gonna make this
Right.
exquisite drawing, and I'm gonna
Never do.
and, and they fill up with just like jargon and
Yeah.
writing and
Uh-huh.
doodles, and it's just. But it's amazing to look back at that thought process, and I don't know. I mean, only I can decipher what they mean, because
Yeah.
only I can read my handwriting and my scribbles and know what they are.
Have you
But
ever shown your sketchbooks in an exhibit?
no, it's been a while since I've shown work, uh, but no, I've never
I would
shown
love
my.
to see that. I'd love to even a little video of you going through some sketchbooks. To me, I always find that seeing that source material always provides new insight. I'm always trying to figure out what what the artist is doing and saying, and sometimes that initial few lines can make all the difference in terms of what's going to happen at the end there.
I think I think that's really important. It's yeah, I think it just, a lot of times the objects we make are the index of the art, right? And the process, of course, as you know, like the process is everything. That's where the energy of
Yeah.
creation is. And I think that's I would love to do that one day. I've pictured exhibits kind of like that.
What does spark your creativity? Like where do the ideas come from? Sometimes artists will say, I get my ideas from nature, or my subconscious, or I have a book that I would go to it. Do you have sort of a go-to place, or do you find that a lot of your ideas come from the same source?
Um, I think ideas like we're just immersed in the world, and it's hard to like be an artist, or like I said, visual art is very much writing for me, so it's very similar in that
So
way.
it's really everything. Are you the
Yeah,
filter?
I mean, it's personal experience. I would say a lot of it is like personal experience. It's right. I think it's just being an artist. It's like the most important thing you can do is describe something through your humanistic lens, and I think that's so valuable. And so that's kind of like, I'm not making art necessarily about myself, but more how my observations of others or the world or memories or feelings.
So you just mentioned the word valuable, and this next question is one of the things I consider most valuable. Let's talk about color. Uh, can you tell me what you think about color?
I think color, I mean, I think it is absolutely so important. It's I think color is basically, it's like the grammar of painting. You know, you know,
Well,
with
trademark
your,
that. The grammar of painting. I like that.
it's like, you know, we have a universal, most people for the most part have universal association to color. You know, of course, Kandinsky wrote all about this. And Joseph Albers, and like you can name all these great colorists, right, who just studied color, and the way that it can set mood and kind of be I mean, you can see it in cinema all the time, right? The way people use light and color lenses to kind of describe the intensity or non-intensity of a scene. And I feel that it is like, it's so important. And that's one thing you do extremely well, Craig, is you are an amazing colorist, I think. And and yeah, it's something that I'm striving to get more control over and pull back, and really kind of use different color relationships throughout my work to describe different feelings.
When you're thinking of color and the use of color in your works, are you thinking about the audience at all in terms of what you're delivering to them, or trying to manipulate your audience either through emotion or movement or anything else? Or do you find that that happens automatically and you're just focusing on the picture for yourself?
Yeah, I think it's both. I think you know, I think for me, I become the audience. You know, like I am definitely concerned about audience. I'm definitely like I'm not making pictures for my audience. I'm having my ideas, and I'm concerned about basically projecting my ideas and onto the viewer so we can relate and have a discussion in that way. Of course, I can't control that. You know, people have different associations for different things, but I do think that there's more or less a universal ground for it built in with symbology and experience through color and composition that we can talk about. So yeah, I definitely try and manipulate the viewer in that way. I want to create experiences, you know, for people, for sure.
You mentioned earlier talking about layers, which is
Mhm.
a very printmaker sort of way of thinking when you go to make artwork. Have you ever experimented with printmaking? Maybe you did and I just haven't seen it.
No, but I should, and I know you're big on printmaking, you know, and it's something that I one of my professors, Julie Heffernan, she was a mentor to me, and she was big into printmaking, and you know, just the different ways of making marks and that sort of thing that you know, prints can offer, and the reductive process. It's something that I think you know, in the future, and given more space, and you know, maybe I'll definitely tackle in the
I would
future.
love to see what you could come up with. So I have time for just two more questions. Um, my first is, looking at your works, this is just kind of a guess, but do you consider your works in any way to be autobiographical, or are you trying to make works that where you step outside of yourself?
Um, for sure, I think and I think inevitably, like you can't remove who the artist is from. I mean, you're looking at an artwork, and it does to you what it wants to do. But I think like the artist is essentially it's their hand and experience is what creates the work. So it's definitely autobiographical. And in my sense, you know, like the narrative project, that is completely loosely based on my life, and then these characters took on their own lives by exaggerating the traits that each person that I'm describing in my life, like and blowing them out of proportion so they kind of become their own thing. So it's both, you know, it's stepping outside of yourself
I
for
had to
other.
figure. You know, there are some artists that want nothing to do with themselves when they're within their work, which I don't know how they do that. But anyway, so last question, simple question: what does making art do for you?
You know, I have watched many of your interviews. I enjoy them ever since Kaylee was on there. I was like, oh, and I know you asked this question a lot, and I would say what it does for me is it gives me a way to look at the world, like a system to analyze the world and figure out my place in it. And it also you know, it points out the absurdities of the world and the beautiful things of life at the same time, and makes me feel, and it also justifies my own position within it, because, you know, of course, I've got to be able to sleep tonight. Yeah, yeah.
So this is
So,
a system that you've set up, though, in order to be able to see the world.
well, what I mean is, right, I can look at the art world. I can see the things that are championed in the art world. I can look at the ridiculousness of the high art world. And then I can also look at people just making work because they have to make work. I mean, in the end, essentially, most artists, that's what they do, whether they're accepted or not, but or become a part of that. But yeah, you know, you have all facets there to look at. You have the beauty of art and the objects and the things that people leave behind for you to think about, which is just incredible. And then you have the art world, which is like just totally absurd and random, you know. And yeah, so I think it does everything. It creates meaning and it creates purpose, because for me, because it allows me to understand my place in the world, basically.
Perfect sense.
I think that goes for anybody involved in anything. If they're in sports,
Yeah,
they're giving you the same thing.
It helps them
You know?
understand. Right.
Yeah,
I just
yeah,
like to
yeah.
hear it out loud, I guess. Well,
Yeah.
we're unfortunately we're out of time. I really want to thank you for coming by to talk to me today about your work. I love talking with artists when they tell me one little thing and it changes everything that I understand about their work. So thank you for giving me all these great little nuggets to work with. I also want to thank everybody who tuned in to watch today, to watch Graham's and I have a conversation. If you have any questions, make sure to put them in the comment section. If I can't answer them myself, I'll pass them along. And of course, we love it when you like, share, and subscribe, because that helps us further ArtShow and what we're doing. So thank you very much for tuning in. And Graham, thank you very much again for coming by to talk to me today.
Thank you so much for doing this, Greg. It's incredible what you're doing.
Take care.